Hey guys, welcome to Wednesday in week 4. We are reading Matthew 25:34 through 40 in the ESV. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." So this is always like a little bit hard for me in the sense of like, it's a little bit of a cultural thing. Like, because it says like to welcome visitors and, it's just not like now we have like hotels and motels and Airbnbs and, it's like there's so much that, or like we have stuff in society taking care of people. Like there's not as many moments to do this sort of thing. But the real call is not those exact things. The real call is like to care for one another and to take care of one another. And one of the things I said here was like that for a long time I felt like I had no resources to spare for those around me. Like I would see people hurting or in need of something, even if it was like making a meal or just meeting over coffee to talk if I felt like they needed some emotional support. And I really didn't like it. Like I always felt like I wanted to help and then I just couldn't. And finally I realized that I had like filled up every spare moment I had.
Oh yeah.
And so all of my resources were taken. And by having all my resources taken, I wasn't able to be a support to other people around me.
Yeah.
Because I was completely depleted in every sense.
Yeah.
And so I really started to try to work on creating space, like margin in my life.
Yeah.
So that through that margin, I would have the ability to actually show up for people. And I'm still not like, there's those people in your life, it's like,
yeah.
If there's an event, if you need a meal, like if you need to move, like what, you know what I mean? Like there's those people who like always show up. Like I wouldn't necessarily say I'm that person.
Right.
But I am conscious of my time with people. And even with meals, there's been so many times, like I realized like a lot of times I would get stressed out because I'm like, well, now I have to create 2 meals. And I realized that just with a little bit of planning, I could actually just make the meal
twice.
Yeah. Just double what I was making and have a good meal for this family and a meal for us and not necessarily be like stressing me out to try to get it done. But I think that we feel there's a lot happening like in society, like in America particularly, where it's just like anything can be taking up your time. Right? Like anything can be taking up your time. But I think in the Midwest especially, there's kind of like this desire for a strong work ethic and this like kind of lifting that up to the point of like really kind of almost encouraging workaholism.
Yeah.
And even if it's not like at work, I think that there's like this desire to like this upholding of busy.
Yeah.
Like busy is a badge.
Every time slot in your day is like filled up, either like running someone else around, going to work, maybe doing like this thing or like overdoing it. And I would feel that rush in me all the time. And I felt like I didn't have like time or space to give to people, especially like my friends. Or if like I knew something was going on in their life.
Right.
I wasn't checking up on them.
Right.
I felt like I'm just barely holding myself together, kind of like what you were saying. But then I was just, and then I started getting in the habit of just like calling them when I knew I had a moment. And turns out I do have some time. Like I feel like oftentimes we feel like we don't have as much time as we do, but I felt like, or I would feel like I didn't have enough time for like the family. But I'm like, no, I'm going to prioritize what they need like other things can wait.
Right.
And it turns out, oh, I'm not as important as I thought I was. Like things are fine.
Right.
But I just think oftentimes it's like what are the priorities that you're having in your life and what are you prioritizing? And it's like when you see someone that is in need, or if you have a sense that like, oh, this person's hanging around, they might need just a friend to talk to.
Right.
It's like, are you there to give that to them?
Right.
Like, or can you help them in a certain way? Because I mean, I don't often see people that like I can shelter, feed, or like hunger, but I do see a lot of people that need someone to hear them. There's so many people walking around hurting right now, or they're going through so much that we don't know about.
Right.
And just giving them space, because they'll start telling you about it.
Right.
And then also to like, as be someone where you're like, hey, I'm thinking about you. If you're going like, hey, I'm praying for you. Right. Or can I pray for you now? And stuff like that. There's so many moments like that where I feel like we miss if we're too busy rushing around and not giving those moments some time to like sit with them.
Well, I think what you said about, do we have enough time? Like, that you actually had time? I think there's a couple different things. I think it's looking at your schedule, looking at your family's schedule, and asking yourself, like, can you create space? Like, what are your family values? What are your personal values? And is everything you're choosing to do matching with those values? And the more important question is, are they matching with God's values?
Yeah.
Like when you look at God's values and what God is calling you to do, if you can't do those things in your life right now, you need to change something.
Yeah.
Because that's how God told us to live, And then the other question though is, do you actually have resources that you don't think that you have? Yeah. Because like for me, realizing that I could just make double the meal. Or the other thing I had done is I was going to make someone a meal and I went and bought extra like containers so that I could have them on hand. So then if someone needed something, I could just like have a container, trying to make it easier to help people, like thinking of it enough in advance, like you said, where you're like, okay, I want to call them. When do I actually have time? Oh, I'm actually alone in the car sometimes. Yeah. I could call them when I'm alone in the car, and it doesn't have to be like an hour long, conversation, and maybe 15 minutes, but they're still going to feel loved and cared for within that space, and especially when you're consistent with it. Yeah. And I think there's so many times that we choose to turn on the TV or scroll social media. And I feel like throughout this whole thing we said that, but I think that there are so many time suckers in our society. I mean, we gave up for Lent. I don't remember when it was. Screens. At some point, well, it wasn't just screen. We both gave up something different. Specifically. I wasn't shopping. I didn't buy anything. Remember that?
You gave up social media.
And you gave up social media. So it was very specific. And I remember all of a sudden, the extra time I had, and I was like, how much time was I spending looking at clothes online? It's like, it seems so silly, but when you have those extra 10 minutes, 15 minutes, all of a sudden you have time to read that book or listen to that article or call that friend or even pray. I mean, there are so many times that I have felt led to pray with someone when I was bored or sitting in silence, because all of a sudden God's like, oh, good, you're available. I actually have some work for you to do. So I think it's looking at your life and saying, what are my values? How do they align with God's values? And is that visible in my life or not? And that may be in actually making some hard decisions for your family that make your family look different than it used to look. Maybe creating some boundaries around screen time or after school activities, or how often your friends are over or not, I mean, and then I think also looking at for you just personally, what are you doing in your spare time? And do you have spare time that you don't think, or spare resources that you don't think that you have? So that is Wednesday. I forgot what day we're on. All right. We'll see you tomorrow.